Hey everyone, today I'm talking about Broom Service, which is a board game dating back to 2015. This one accommodates 2 to 5 players and takes 45 to 75 minutes to play. Before I get into my review of Broom Service, I just want to give a shout out to Kienda.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer in the UK. So you may notice from the box here, this game is actually a co-design by Alexander Pfister and Andreas Pelikan. However, this one is pretty different to the more modern Alexander Pfister games you might play nowadays. This one is a pretty simple, almost Gateway Plus level pick up and deliver and hand management game where you take the form of these witches and you're trying to collect potions and drop them off at these different magical towers to score victory points. You're trying to shift these clouds out of the way by using magical wands to get more victory points. And the way you do that is through the use of cards. And this is probably the thing that makes this game unique to other kind of pick up and deliver games is the use and the way that these cards are resolved throughout the turn. So as you can see here, you've got different types of cards. You've got pretty much 4 different types of cards, but kind of categories within those types. So you have gatherers, and gatherers are going to be your main way of getting potions, and potions are your kind of commodity in the game, which you're trying to pick up and deliver to the matching towers. So you can drop these purple potions off at these purple towers if you have that, and get the corresponding amount of points. You've got 2 different types of towers as well, where you've got these ones where they have the arrows towards them like this, which means that when you deliver them, they're going to be covered up for good and nobody else can go there. Or you've got the ones like this, where you've got the arrow kind of shifting away from it, which means that when they're delivered there, they actually put back into the common supply and somebody else can go there in future turns. Each player also has 2 witches of their colour, which can help them cover the board a bit quicker than if there was just the one. So let's talk about how the game plays and what the actual cards do. I think before I get into the actual mechanisms of the game, I'll talk about the actual cards. So you've got fruit gatherers here, which let you gain, as I mentioned earlier, let you gain your resources, that let you gain your potions, and these magical wands, which I'll talk about the significance of later. So you've got herb wands, you've got root wands, and you have fruit wands as well, which basically just correspond to the different colours. You've got these witches here, which are almost your movement cards. So your forest witch lets you move into forests, the hill witches let you move into hills, and so on. You've got prairies and mountain witches as well. You've got druids, which let you deposit your potions at the location where you currently are, because normally the kind of golden rule is that you can't deposit a potion unless you move beforehand, but druids let you break that rule and let you sit where you are and then deposit a potion. And you've got this kind of unique card here called the Weather Fairy, which you're going to use to cash in magic wands to shift these clouds out of the way. And these clouds are not only good because when you collect them, you get these lightning bolts, and these lightning bolts will score you points based on this sliding scale here. So the more lightning bolts you collect at the end of the game, you can get up to 30 points for doing so. And the little number here corresponds to how many of these magic wands you have to spend in order to shift that cloud. And these clouds also act as blockers, so you can't actually travel through these regions, but you can't actually travel through the water anyway. But if I was to put them, say, use this cloud here and shift this out of the way, I could then travel through this route where, if that cloud is still on there, that's pretty much kind of unpassable terrain. So the game is going to play out over 7 rounds, and each of these rounds is going to have a corresponding event to it. So you've got this randomised deck of cards here. I think 10 come with the game, and you use 7, obviously, for each of these 7 rounds. And that's going to affect what happens in that round. We're going to give you some kind of golden rule which affects all the players. So this example here for our first round says Braveheart, and the first player to play each roll card must be brave, and the first player of the round gets 1 magical wand. And this is something that you need to become familiar with this game, is that you have these 2 kind of words which based on the terminology of the game called brave and cowardly, because as you can see here, each of these roll cards has 2 bits of text on it. So you've got the brave bit of text and you've got the cowardly bit of text. And now what this means is that the brave action is basically a more powerful version of that, but you risk not being able to resolve that action if you take the brave action. But the cowardly one, you can always take the cowardly one without having to be affected by other players. And we'll talk about how that works right now. So at the start of each round, each player is going to simultaneously select 4 of their 10 cards, and I should say each player's set of cards is identical, so people don't have cards that you don't have, and you're going to use these cards considering a certain amount of things. So obviously you need to consider where your witches currently are and where your opponent's witches are as well, because that could affect whether you want to take a brave or cowardly action. So at the moment we're pretty limited on what we can do, but I suppose we could venture into the mountains, we could venture into the forestry, we can go into this forest, we can go into this plains here, and so on, or this prairie. And we could also choose to shift some of these clouds if we wanted to. But because we're all so close together, we're probably going to have a good idea of what we're going to want to do. So let's just say, I'm not going to think too much here. Let's say I take this Prairie Witch card. Let's just say I take this Weather Fairy card. I'll take a Forest Witch card. There we go. And we'll also take a Mountain Witch card. Here we go. And again, each player is going to do this simultaneously. So once you have your 4 cards selected, the first player is going to choose one of their cards and going to declare it out loud and publicly. And they're also going to declare which of the 2 roles they want to take. So are they going to be, let's just say I use this Forest Witch card here. Am I going to be a brave Forest Witch, or am I going to be a cowardly Forest Witch? The cowardly one is rather simple to explain. So if I go say I'm a cowardly Forest Witch, I simply say I'm a cowardly Forest Witch and then take the corresponding action in this example, which would be to shift into a adjacent forest, like so. But if I was to take the brave Forest Witch action, before I resolve my action, I would have to say, look, I'm the brave Forest Witch, and I make that public, but I won't be able to resolve that action until it's passed through all the other players, because basically the player to my left would then have the choice to, or if they have the Forest Witch card, they could either say, yeah, I'm actually going to play the brave Forest Witch, of course, if they had that card in their hand. And if they did, then you're going to actually render your card defunct and you're not going to be able to use it for that round. But they could also just say, look, I've got the Forest Witch, but I'm going to use the cowardly action. And then it'll go to the next player and they'll do the same thing, and then to the next player and do the same thing. Again, obviously depending on the player count. But if it gets right back round to you and nobody else has declared they're brave, then you get to take the full action here, which in this example would be to not only travel, which the cowardly action would allow you, but also to deposit a potion straight away, like so, and get the points and magical ones if there are them. So again, you've got this idea of almost this push your luck and bluffing aspect to it, where are you going to take that strong action and risk it being cancelled because another player might have chosen it, or are you going to play it safe and take that cowardly action? And that's going to be pretty much the core mechanism of the game and how the game plays out. And whoever was the bravest player, or whoever got to resolve the brave action in that current round, actually becomes the starting player next turn, meaning that they've got more risk of getting their brave action cancelled should they choose to take a brave action. So all the brave actions are slightly more improved. So you see the Weather Fairy here. This one would normally just let you cancel a cloud. Just normally get you cancel a cloud if you take the cowardly action. If you take the brave action, you get a bonus 3 points. And we talked about the witches already, which just let you move and deposit a potion where normally you'd just be able to move. You've got the herb gatherers, which would, again, the cowardly ones would normally just give you 1 potion like such. But this one here actually gives you 2 potions and a magic wand if you were to finalise that brave action. The peak druid would normally just let you deposit a potion where you're standing, but this one actually lets you deposit a potion and get a bonus 3 points. Again, the other gatherers sometimes will give you 2 magic wands, and so on. So it's all about balancing, can you get away with the brave action or not? And as I mentioned earlier, that is really going to change as the game develops, as say, more people are going to be spread all over the board in different ways. And of course, when the game does play out, you're going to start realising, I can probably get away with playing a prairie action because nobody else is in a position where they want to take that brave prairie action. So it is about constantly being on top of the board and seeing what you can get away with at all times. And that is the fundamental basics of Broom Service. You can see it's a really simple game, but it's all about planning those cards accordingly and deciding whether you want to be brave or not. So let's talk about how I feel about Broom Service. So I will say there are some variations of the game where you can choose to ramp up the complexity somewhat by adding these different tokens into the different locations, which can give you additional bonuses and things. But I think if you've had your mind kind of made up already on the game, the additional variants aren't going to really change that because they are quite minor. So let's talk about the actual mechanism itself. So first off, let's just talk about the main decision here. So the whole brave and cowardly action I think is pretty clever. And I do like things, that tension of, am I going to get away with this? Am I going to keep taking these brave actions and potentially risk losing them to other players? And got to consider the player order as well, because if you keep going first, then taking that brave action is going to be a big risk. Or am I going to keep trickling along at my own pace, taking the more cowardly actions, but at least ensuring that I get things done? So it does have that, again, that pushy like aspect to it, that idea of getting into your opponent's head and reading the board state and seeing what you can and can't do. But that kind of is a double-edged sword of the game, because while it is the kind of tension and the ongoing thread throughout the game, it can sometimes be a bit frustrating when you're trying to take these actions and it's just never going your way, and you keep getting cancelled. But I suppose in some way that does balance itself out, because if you do get your action cancelled, then at least you're not going to be the first player in the following turn, and it means that you can actually have some control over what you do. But again, it all ties back to being brave or not. So are you going to be greedy, or are you going to play it a bit safe? And probably striking a balance between the two is the recipe for success. The actual pick up and deliver itself is as pretty much as simple as it gets, but I do like the way that some of these towers are permanently blocked off when you choose to deliver that potion, and some of them do actually remain open, just to give you options at all times. As some of these towers are on the board, are also on the borders of these different regions as well, to give you more flexibility. And I like the way that sometimes you're forced to actually use these weather fairy cards in order to venture into new lands, because you'll start with a pretty restricted area, but you can start venturing to these new higher point areas the more you play these weather fairies, or even capitalize off the back of other people playing their weather fairies, so that you can get into these higher point regions where you can get like 7 or even 10 points if you go right to the other side of the board. It also helps that you have 2 different witches on the board rather than just the one. So again, you can use that to bluff the other players into playing their more brave actions, where ultimately you're going to end up trumping them by playing your brave action if you follow them. So again, it does give you more options and more variability in what you can do and different paths you can follow, and gives you that ability to be a little bit more flexible. Also, I find the event cards actually add quite a lot of flavour to the game. I do think they're quite a welcome addition. For example, here you've got some quite interesting ones where you've got the works here, which says at the end of the round, each player may return 1 resource of each type to the supply and gain 9 victory points. So you can cash in all the resources to get a big injection of points there. You've got the black marker here, where if you play a cowardly card this round, you can instead choose to take 3 actions. So if you've not got a particular thing you want to do, you can just get 3 victory points rather than just taking that cowardly action. The black distillery here says the player who play cowardly this round may choose to take any free resource instead of performing the action. So again, more options and more flexibility. I really like this more or less card here, where you can choose to draw more or less cards than the normal 4 cards you draw. So at the start of the round, so normally, as I said, you draw 4 cards. If you do that, you can choose to do that and get 0 points, but you can choose to actually draw more cards by taking 5 cards into your hand, but losing 3 points for doing so. Or you can actually choose to take fewer cards than that, even just taking 1 card action and getting a massive 10 points. You've got this flock together here, so if your both witches are in the same type of region at the end of the round, you get an additional 4 points. And this one here as well, which is the player who owns just 5 or fewer resources at the end of the round gets 3 victory points. So you do want to try and tailor your almost tactically maneuver around these events to make sure that you're getting as many points as you can. And a lot of them as well have some kind of puzzle to them, where you want to be having your witches on certain terrains at the end of the round, and react to the current board state so that you get points, or even not have to forfeit points for doing so. The game does only take 7 rounds to resolve, and I do think that's pretty much the sweet spot for this game. It doesn't outstay its welcome at all, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it does get played in around 60 minutes, give or take. So I've got no issues about how long the game takes. It does tick along quite nicely. And, despite you sometimes not resolving actions on your round, it does have meaningful decisions throughout. And when it does come to your turn, and it is you are put on that spot on whether to, are you going to take that risk and take that brave action, or are you going to do the cowardly action? It always feels like a meaningful decision and not just a throwaway action. So again, it does have some engaging decisions here and some good decision space, considering how long the game takes. The interaction between the players is pretty strong throughout the game, not only because, of course, the hand management system and the brave and cowardly actions, but because there is quite a race to get to the best towers, and to not only focus on yourself, but being careful what you leave opportunities to the other players. Because sometimes you might want to clear a cloud out of the way, and then somebody comes charging through and delivering a certain potion. So You do have to bear that in mind and stop leaving opportunities to other players. And of course, that tension of getting the best spots fulfilled is there. The scalability is something of a two-edged sword here. So I do feel like you do need to play, say, at least 3 players to get the most out of this game. But it does scale from 3 to 5 pretty nicely. And considering it's a more involved game that normally caters to 5 players, I think it's pretty nice. 2 players I'd probably choose to shy away from, because I don't think the whole brave and cowardly action is going to shine quite as strongly with that player count. But however, the game does do quite a good job of tightening the game up with fewer players by adding these bewitched cards to the game, where at the start of the game you're going to choose a player's cards of a colour that isn't being used. And then those cards are going to be considered bewitched, which means that if you take those particular actions, then you're going to actually end up losing points. So it does give you, again, that tightens the board down and tightens your actions so that you just haven't got free reign to do what you want to do. So let's talk about the production for Broom Service. So first off, aesthetically, I think the game looks pretty nice. It's very clear to see what all the different regions are. Sometimes it can be a bit loose in terms of where the these different towers are. I don't quite like them being on the borders, and sometimes you think, is it here or is it there? But my biggest issue is the lack of colorblind friendliness. These orange and green temples, I almost cannot tell the difference between them. Being colorblind myself, so bear that in mind if you are interested in the game. Sometimes it can be quite difficult to differentiate those towers, but the artwork and stuff on the cards is fine. The text is a little bit small on the cards, but it's not a massive issue because once you've learned what the cards do, it's pretty obvious what they do, so you don't need to keep reading them. And of course, the little witch pawn and stuff are nice, and I've got no issues with the actual visuals of the game apart from that colourblind issue. So let's get into my final thoughts for Broom Service. So generally, I'm a big fan of pick up and deliver games, and I will say straight up, this is a solid one. And it certainly is unique. I generally love games when they try something different, and I have never seen this card, this brave and cowardly system used before. And despite being quite jarring to start the game, I think at least initially when you start learning the game, it's quite hard to wrap your head around. But once you start learning and start playing the game, that real kind of tension and that fun factor does start to shine through much stronger. So it does take a little bit to get out your system and to learn about how this card system works. But once it clicks, it really clicks, and there's a lot of fun. I suppose my only issue with the game is, not the actual fault of the game, is that this is competing with some other games of a similar type for the exact same kind of shelf space, if that makes sense. So, for example, for a medium light pick up and deliver game like this, I'd probably lean towards something like Fast Sloths or something like maybe Free Ride. Or if I want to take it to the next level, I'll play something like the Oracle of Delphi. So for that reason, I really do struggle to see where this game is going to fit into my collection, despite enjoying it in its own right. So it's kind of one of those victims to the current kind of market, really, where there's so much competition for each genre. And this one, I don't think is the top of the genre, despite being really solid. So it's almost a shame, because if those games didn't exist, I would certainly keep this in my collection. This has a lot going on in this game that I do enjoy. Unfortunately, it's not going to have quite enough to stick around any longer. But I'm really glad I experienced it. It's certainly a change of pace for any game you'd expect to see with Alexander's Pfister's name on the box. But if this does appeal to you and you do like pick and deliver and you want that medium light game that can be played in an hour, give this one a look. I said I would recommend other games before it. It's solid. I can't really complain about it, but unfortunately it's just not going to stick around because the competition is too fierce for this one, and I don't think it's as good as those aforementioned titles. So unfortunately I can't recommend Broom Service, at least as a purchase. I can certainly recommend to play it if you do get the opportunity, because it is solid. It's close to being a recommendation for me, but I can't do it because of those other games. Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you found it useful or at least somewhat entertaining, then please hit like and consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. Additionally, if you wish to support the show, because I am a one-man operation and I don't get any support from publishers, then please consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/chairman of the board, where you can back for as little as £2 per month. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.